Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which was easily my most anticipated movie of this entire year because I love the Guardians of the Galaxy. I love these characters and I love James Gunn, who's coming back once again to write and direct the finale of the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy and a send-off for these characters in the MCU. Of course, these characters, falling through with Guardians 1, 2, Infinity War, Endgame, and of course the holiday special that came out in December. These are all characters that I've come to know and love, and with this send-off, I was really worried about whether or not it would be as satisfying as I have been told it was from the critics that have seen this movie that I do love and trust their opinions on. And of course, I watched it tonight and I absolutely loved this movie. It was so incredibly satisfying as a capping off of this trilogy, and I cannot wait to talk about full spoilers for this movie. So if you've not seen Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 just yet, I highly recommend you to go check it out in theaters right now because it is easily one of my favorite MCU movies to come out pretty much ever. So let's get into what this movie is actually about, because I think the trailers have done a really great job at hiding the true plot of this movie. Because of course we start off the film right essentially where the Guardians of the Galaxy holiday special left off, which if you've not seen the holiday special, it's actually pretty important, not I guess important for this movie, but there's one revelation that they talk about in this movie right at the start of the movie, which is of course Mantis realizing that she is actually the sister of Star-Lord in the holiday special. So that is mentioned right off the bat, and their dynamic in this movie is also explored a little bit in this film as well. So of course that's great to see, but the Guardians are essentially hanging out on nowhere. Of course, Star-Lord is still sad about the things that have happened with Gamora and Infinity War and Endgame. Of course, she's still off doing her own thing. We'll get into Gamora here in a second, but the movie really kicks off with Adam Warlock showing up on nowhere to kidnap Rocket Raccoon, because you find out early on that the Sovereign were actually created by the High Evolutionary, who of course was the creator of Rocket Raccoon, and there's a reason why the High Evolutionary wants to get his hands on one of his greatest creations, an accidental, achievement of his when it came with him creating Rocket Raccoon all those years ago with the origin story that we get into with this movie. And so that is the inciting incident. The inciting incident is Adam Warlock showing up on nowhere to kidnap Rocket Raccoon, and Rocket gets severely injured at the beginning of this movie, and so the Guardians have to go on a very stressful adventure to try to save Rocket's life, and that is the story of this movie. For the first half of this movie, Rocket is actually out of commission. He's on his deathbed essentially. He has 48 hours to live until they are able to get the stuff that they need to possibly save his life, and so right from the beginning of this movie, there is extremely high stakes, because one of our most beloved characters, the saddest creature in the universe, as James Gunn put it at Comic-Con, just I think it was either last year or the year before, this character is now in mortal danger. And of course, Rocket being a fan favorite for especially everybody, including myself, it was incredibly tense to see him on that bed dying right like 20 minutes into the movie. So let's of course get into the characters of this movie, because I think that is one of the most impressive parts of all the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, but particularly with this one, is every single character not only gets a moment to shine in terms of the action set pieces or the emotional, more dramatic moments in this movie, but they also get great send-offs for their story in this movie. And of course you have some of the newer characters, or I guess secondary characters in terms of the newer cast for Guardians of the Galaxy. Let's talk about Cosmo and Kraglin first, who don't get a lot to do in this movie, but they still have some really fun moments. Of course, Cosmo being the dog that was actually introduced in the first Guardians of the Galaxy in the collector's, whole room of all the creatures that he has collected over all the years. And so we finally get to see Cosmo played by Maria Bakalova, who was really fun in this movie. I really liked the dynamic between Cosmo and of course Kraglin in this movie, who have a very funny running joke about how Kraglin says that Cosmo is a bad dog at the beginning of the movie, and they have a running joke throughout the entire thing. They're kind of left on nowhere until all the events transpire with the High Evolutionary later on in the film, and so they're kind of doing their own thing on nowhere until of course they come to the end of the film to try to rescue the Guardians on the High Evolutionary ship. And so they have their own little fun moments, and I guess their arc is Kraglin saying that she is a good dog, and that's Kraglin also gets to learn how to use the arrow that was passed off from Yondu in a very satisfying moment where you actually get to see Yondu make a cameo appearance in this film as well. You get to see him say that he uses his heart to be able to control the arrow, and so you get a really fun sequence where you get to see Kraglin now using the arrow to take out all these weird monster creatures that the High Evolutionary has created for his army, in a very fun sequence like that. So again, these characters, although they aren't prevalent and they have little mini arcs of their own which are not necessarily impactful, they still have some moments to shine with themselves. But of course, some of my favorite characters from the Guardians of the Galaxy cast ever since the beginning was Drax, and of course in the second film, the introduction of Mantis and her journey throughout this entire, trilogy of the films that she has been in. Pom Klementieff and Bautista, and their chemistry together whenever they're on screen is just so entertaining. Again, the holiday special, with them kind of being the stars of the holiday special, it is so fun watching these two on screen. They're bantering between each other, their jokes that they have back and forth is always so incredibly entertaining and so funny because of course Dave Bautista is hilarious as this role, but to get a lot of great drama with these characters too, and their arcs in this film is also impactful. There's a great moment where Mantis is actually defending Drax's role in the Guardians of the Galaxy to Nebula, because Nebula is kind of like the audience character in terms of the audience reaction to Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which is that, Drax is kind of the goofball in Volume 2 that didn't really have a purpose and stakes in the actual story. He was more the comedic relief, and I think the main complaints about him in that film was that he's too jokey in that one. He wasn't as serious and as entertaining as he was in the first volume, which I would agree to a certain extent, but at the same time, all his jokes land in Volume 2. He is so funny in that film that I don't think there's a single joke he has in it that doesn't land here. And her defense of this is actually extremely sweet, basically saying that yes, he is an idiot, he's kind of dumb in a lot of different situations, but he has value because he does make the Guardians laugh. He's kind of the heart of the team in a lot of different ways, and also he's very capable in not only the action sequences, but he has some very clever moments in this film as well when it comes to the children that the High Evolutionary have, which again, we'll get into some of the more inner workings of the actual villain elements a little bit later on in this review, but he is very helpful in this film, and even Drax goes through a very important arc in this film, which I also do want to point out that I think a lot of people were kind of expecting Drax to die in this movie, and to say it right off the bat here in the spoiler review, none of our Guardians die in this film, and I'm so happy for it, because with all the trauma, with all the heartbreak that you get to see with especially Rocket's backstory in this film, by the end of the film, it's kind of refreshing that nobody did die, and they all kind of go off with their own arcs, and their send-offs are what I'll get to in a minute, but Drax's send-off was pretty much perfect because he was a father. He did love Gamora and Yvette, who were his wife and his daughter in that first film, and so by the end of this film, yes, he has all these children now that he saved from the High Evolutionary ship, and he's meant to be a dad. He's not meant to be Drax the Destroyer. He's meant to be Drax the dad, and you get to see a lot of great moments where you get to see him dance with the kids at the ending of this film. And so all those moments in the past where he said that there's two types of people in this world, one that dances and one that does not, and he is firmly one that does not dance, and that the fact that you get to see him dance, and that he has learned that from the Guardians of the Galaxy, he's learned that from his family, that he will now dance and have, he's able to move on with his life in a very meaningful way of being a father once again, is a beautiful arc for that character. And with Mantis's character, of course, she is very capable in this film. She has a great action sequence on that one. I guess it's like this organic, it's not really a plan, it's like this organic base. Like, I thought it was a prison break sequence in the trailer, but it's definitely not a prison break sequence. It's just this base that's the High Evolutionary has made to essentially do these experiments on organic material. And so there's a great sequence where Mantis has to fight in this entire area. She uses her empath abilities in a very interesting way because she can basically go up to somebody and use her empath to make them do something weird or make them fight for her or do all these different things. There's a great moment where she makes this character, hopelessly fall in love with Drax, which I thought was so incredibly funny. I wish that joke came back later on in the fight sequence. Unfortunately, it did not, but her role in this film was very, very fun. Her in the action sequences, her in the comedy sequences, her in the dramatic moments with Peter, all those moments worked really well. She's definitely one of my new favorites of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and I love that her send-off was that she wants to kind of go off on her own. She's always been told what to do by either it was Ego or either it was the Guardians of the Galaxy. She wants to kind of find herself and hopefully her own spin-off, whether it's a series or movie. I do not care. I want to see Mantis again because she was so good in this film. Another character that has not only become one of my favorite characters in the Guardians of the Galaxy, but also one of my favorite characters in the MCU is, of course, Nebula. She's gone on an incredible arc and journey throughout the entirety of the MCU that is not only very impactful for her as a character, but really transformative. She's gone on probably the greatest arc of everybody besides maybe Tony Stark in terms of where she started to where she ends up in this film, because of course, her being very one note in the original Guardians of the Galaxy film, being the character that is very robotic, that will listen to every demand that her father makes, to, her relationship with Gamora growing throughout all the films, to her going against her father and her losing her sister, and of course all the events that happen in Endgame with her fighting against her father with the Avengers and being very important and integral in that role as well. And so now we have in Volume 3, her dynamic with Gamora is going to be entirely different, because Gamora is treated as if she did die in Infinity War, because she did die in Infinity War. This is a brand new Gamora, so these dynamics are going to be brand new and interesting once again, and that is exactly what they do with these characters. And of course, Nebula is going to be extremely capable in the action sequences as well. She has this new arm tech that is awesome. I loved her in all the action sequences, and I was very afraid that she was going to sacrifice herself at the end of this movie when she went to the, I guess, the cockpits of the High Evolutionary ship, and she plugs into it to try to control it, to try to keep it from going off out of control and crashing. And I thought she was going to be left behind there, and she was going to sacrifice herself to save the rest of the team. And I was terrified for this character because she has reached the ending of her arc. And so every single character, there's a lot of, I don't want to say it was death baiting in this film, but I think that there's a lot of precedent set by the audience expectations of this movie, of seeing people die in this film with the Guardians. And I think I could have sworn James Gunn said that there's going to be a few members of the Guardians that were going to die in this film. So he's a liar for that one. But I'm very happy that she made it out alive because she is one of my favorite characters in this entire film. And she's also left as the leader of nowhere by the end of this film. So I wonder if we're going to get some more Nebula. I love Karen Gillan. I want to see her continue in this role. It's just going to be hard to see this character, go on in the MCU without James Gunn, that's going to be a whole other story. And speaking of Gamora, let's talk about Peter Quill and Gamora's relationship and this brand new dynamic that they have in this film, because of course this is a brand new Gamora, and I love that they really do treat her as a brand new character. She's definitely not the Gamora that we knew in Volume 2 or Volume 1, and so they really get to have fun with this. They really get to play with it. Gamora is introduced in this film as a Ravager, working with Sylvester Stallone's character and all the other characters that were cameos at the end of the second Guardians of the Galaxy film, and it's really great to see all these Ravagers, kind of take over Quill's ship, and you think that, are they trying to attack them or trying to fight them? But she's actually the contact that Nebula had to try to get them to the place where they needed to be to save Rocket, and so this is a very natural way to bring her into the story. And of course you get to see little clips that they've released online of, Peter Quill trying to win back Gamora, and all those moments were so incredibly sweet. But Peter's arc of, realizing and accepting the fact that Gamora did die, and that this character is not the same, but also Gamora learning that yes, these characters, although she doesn't really know them, she means so much to this team. You can feel a gap, you can feel a hole missing with these characters, and it's very tragic to see her interact and not wanting to connect with them. But her entire arc throughout this entire movie is realizing that she does mean a lot to them, and that's her being there and her helping out and her acknowledging that, and talking to Groot and all the fun things of her not knowing what Groot is saying throughout this entire movie, and all the interactions that she has with Nebula and Star-Lord, and the conversations they have at the end of the film where they kind of say a sweet goodbye to each other. It is incredibly heartbreaking, but it's nice to see that James Gunn really did run with that storyline that was set up in Infinity War and Endgame, and you get to see I guess a nice little send-off for these characters and some closure for Peter Quill at the loss of Gamora. And let's talk about Chris Pratt, because Chris Pratt, this is easily his best role that he's ever done. He is so great at playing Star-Lord. Yeah, he's fine as Owen in the Jurassic World movies. I think the writing doesn't give him a lot to do here, but when he really gets the material to shine in this movie, especially when it comes to him desperately trying to save his best friend in Rocket, you really get to feel these dynamics. He already lost Gamora. He cannot lose his best friend, and you can feel that in Chris Pratt's performance. That is just absolutely heartbreaking in this film. And of course you're going to get some fun Peter Quill quippy type moments in this film, but Chris Pratt is really given the task of having a much more dramatic role in this film, especially when it comes to him being a drunk at the beginning of the film and realizing that he's been disconnected with his team. He hasn't been there for them essentially for a very long time. You even get to see that a little bit in the holiday special, him kind of being off on his own while the rest of the team have to try to cheer him up. That was the whole point of the holiday special, and he is still struggling with all these things. He needed some closure with Gamora. He was so desperate to save Rocket in this film. That was absolutely heartbreaking to see the sequence where Rocket essentially dies in this film on the deathbed, and you get to hear Chris Pratt just break down and cry in that scene, which you get to see a little bit of in the trailer, and he is so great in this role. But to skip to the end of the film with his character, you get a great moment where he's the last one on the High Evolutionary ship and he has to try to jump over. He drops his Zune and he has to go back and grab his Zune because of course he has that music and that is so incredibly important to him. And so yes, of course he goes back for it, and he essentially almost dies because of it. And it's another kind of death baiting thing. Maybe some people will be irritated by the death baiting in this film. Rocket has a bait death in this movie. Nebula has another thing where she seems like she's going to be left behind. Of course, everybody's afraid of Drax dying because they talked about how Dave Bautista really wants to move on from this character. And of course, Chris Pratt jumping out of that ship, getting stuck in space, essentially freezing up entirely. His face is bloating, and it's a very brutal death, and he just wanted to get back to his Zune. That's a very in-character thing for him to do, but if he did die in this moment with his face all bloated, it just felt like a setup to a joke. And I think if I had any complaints about that scene, I think that's one thing I would have taken out, because it just feels a little silly. And of course, him gifting it to Rocket at the end of this film, saying that, this music now belongs to you, that was another beautiful moment. I'm very glad that they had some closure with those characters too. So I'm glad they didn't kill off Star-Lord. And to skip to the end credits where he actually goes home to meet his grandfather, being away from Earth for so long, and that is brought up at the beginning of this film, saying that, he's kind of run away from all his problems. He is focused more on his own grief, and he didn't even think about his family that left at home. That's, his grandfather lost his daughter and his grandson in the very same day because he has been too afraid to go back home. And of course, Mantis is trying to tell him the exact same thing. So by the end of the film, he goes back to Earth finally after all these years to say hi to his grandfather. But after that whole post-credit sequence, you get to see a text that says, the legendary Star-Lord will return. So I guess we're going to see a lot more Chris Pratt in the MCU, and I'm glad for it because he is so great in this role. But again, the same caveat being that James Gunn is not going to be the one behind the camera. He's not going to be the one writing the script for him, so hopefully they can pull it off. And let's, of course, talk about the legendary Rocket Raccoon in this film, because this is his movie, and in a lot of ways, this really is his trilogy. His arc throughout this entire series has been, again, very satisfying, very rewarding, and very grand throughout all of these movies, and his kind of sheltered emotions, the emotional walls that he put up to block out everybody else from knowing who he truly is, what he truly went through with the High Evolutionary. And to talk about some of the criticisms that I've heard of this movie from, the critics that saw it at the premiere, I've heard one complaint about the kind of tonal whiplash in this movie, because you'll have, I guess one great example of that is, at the beginning of the movie, you have the Guardians of the Galaxy, the actual team themselves, in torment because Rocket has just almost died. He's on his deathbed, essentially. They're all very stressed out, and you get to hear some fun, pulpy music, and it flashes back to Rocket's backstory, where he gets to meet Lila and Floor and Teefs, and he has this dynamic where they're all dancing together and becoming friends, and it's a very jarring kind of tonal switch because you get to see the Guardians all rushing out to save his life, and they're all very stressed and very dour about that. But then you get to see, fun music with the flashback of them all dancing together, and it kind of transitions to be the opposite of that, where you get to have the second act of this movie, which is, kind of a more fun, pulpy thing with the Guardians of the Galaxy doing their thing on that organic planet. You get to have all the cameos of the James Gunn, cast. That's, Nathan Fillion, Danielle Melchior from the Suicide Squad, and of course, his wife. But with all the fun Guardians tone type of thing that's happening with this entire sequence on this, fleshy planet, then you're also flashing back to the very horrific things that happen to Rocket in his backstory, which includes the death of all those, adorable characters that you literally just met with Floor and with Lila and with Teefs, and all of them die in a very brutal and just emotionally draining way. And of course, you get to see how he was experimented on, how the High Evolutionary treated him, and the reason why the High Evolutionary wanted him so badly was because, he was smarter than him. He created something that was greater than himself, and him having that god complex, he couldn't believe that this inferior creature in his eyes that was never going to go on the planet that he has been building, this utopia for all these animals that have been perfected with their genes. He's essentially Bowser from the Super Mario Bros. Live action movie, which is quickly evolving characters to be smarter than they actually would be at the moment of their own evolution, or I guess de-evolving them in the case of the Super Mario Brothers to make them Goombas. That's just a weird connection that I can make between Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 and the live action Mario movie from the 90s. That's a connection. But the High Evolutionary just can't comprehend the fact that he created something that's better than him, and it's just one specific way of, knowing exactly what to do to fix his own creations, to fix his machine that he's been working on his entire life to make. And so it's just this little idea that he's better than him is something that just actually breaks down the character, and that is why the High Evolutionary wants to get him so badly, because Rocket makes his escape after the death of Lila and all his friends that he made in this essentially prison. And of course you get a prison break sequence with Rocket Raccoon knowing how to break out of prison, which of course is going to make Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 and that prison break sequence just that much more heartbreaking, knowing where he gained that skill from, of course knowing where he got his name from dreaming to flying into the sky with his friends. It is absolutely heartbreaking and gut-wrenching, and I've heard a lot of critics as well kind of warning people that if you're bringing younger children to this movie, or if you're very squeamish when it comes to, I guess, some brutal things that happen to animals, some animal cruelty that is seen on screen, I think it was hyped up a little bit too much from critics like Dan Merle, who said that it was very gut-wrenching, and maybe I just love horror movies too much and I watch a lot of it, but you didn't get to see as much as I thought you would see. But still, it is absolutely devastating and heartbreaking to see this CGI raccoon that you've grown so much to absolutely love in these movies, to see his backstory that is completely tragic, and to see what happens with all the other characters in this complex. It is very, very good. But to get back to the tonal whiplash that this movie does have, of course, the first act being happy Rocket, sad Guardians, the second act being a sad Rocket, happy Guardians, and the third act kind of being a culmination of these groups trying to take out the High Evolutionary because of how much you now hate him because of the things that he did to Rocket by the third act. I think all of it is earned because I think the Guardians of the Galaxy work in really any tone. I think it's a testament to see these characters in something like Infinity War, which, yes, you do have their personalities bleed through the screen because they are going to make the jokes, they are going to be very fun, and the way that they're going to pull off these missions are going to be very entertaining to watch. And so, yes, you're going to have those moments, but they work in a more dramatic tone like Infinity War that had a more somber and depressing tone because of the things they have to go through in that film, especially with the death of Gamora. And so I think it does work here. Yes, I do understand the complaints about, things going right from a funny joke to flashing back to see Rocket go through an absolutely devastating moments, but it didn't bother me too much. And CHukwudi Iwuji as the High Evolutionary was also incredible in this film. He was a phenomenal villain, and I know he has a lot of very loud and outlandish moments where he's screaming at the camera, and apparently some critics are, I guess, complaining about that, but he was so good in this film. He was great in Peacemaker as well, and the High Evolutionary character, like I said, this god complex that he has was always a fascinating character to watch on screen. And again, you absolutely hated this guy so much, and by the time he gets his comeuppance by the end of the film with the Guardians absolutely just whipping him back and forth was very satisfying because he wasn't the type of villain that is like the imposing force physically. He was more the imposing force mentally with the tricks and the games that he played with Rocket in this film, and how he was trying to torture them, and how he was so blinded by his own ego, essentially, kind of in a similar way that Ego was blinded by his own ego in the second film, and how he was also kind of an Elon Musk type tech oligarch that is very, powerful and has his own, ideals of how the world should work. And so I don't think Elon Musk would very much like this movie, but I do think that this character and this villain in this movie served his purpose tenfold, and I think he was a really great villain. And also by the ending of the film, where they literally peel his face off and you get to see his faceless corpse on the ground, that was really brutal. I'm kind of surprised that James Gunn got away with not only, I will say, the second F-bomb in the MCU, it's not the first one, I'll tell you why that in a second, but also peeling off a face of this character and also all the animal cruelty in this film. It is a very hard PG-13. It is still very funny and still very much a Guardians of the Galaxy movie, but it is a very tense and dramatic one. And Chris Pratt's F-bomb that is dropped in this movie is the second F-bomb because, of course, GROOT said this in the second movie.
I am GROOT.
What's that?
He says, welcome to the frickin' Guardians of the Galaxy. Only he didn't use frickin'.
And of course, there's that absolutely gut-wrenching scene where Rocket's literally on his deathbed. He literally dies. He flatlines in this movie, and you get to see Quill just absolutely sobbing over his body, and Gamora saying that you have to let him go, that he is gone. And you're just a sobbing mess in the theater watching this play out on screen. And Rocket is in heaven, essentially seeing Lila and all his friends once again, which just the small amount of screen time that you have with all these other creatures at the beginning of this movie with the flashbacks of Rocket's backstory, you feel so connected to these people. And so when Lila says it's not quite time for you to join us up here just quite yet, and he jolts back awake and he hears the voice of the High Evolutionary, it is very tragic just to hear his gasp and that trauma just come back to the surface in that moment after his extremely near-death experience. And if there's one thing that I would have liked to add in this movie, I'll say there's two moments I wish they added with Rocket. One is a moment where, he does gasp when he hears the High Evolutionary's voice, but I wanted some more hesitation with him, not wanting to go through with this plan, freaking out, why would you bring me back to this guy? Why would you bring me anywhere near where my backstory was? Try to, push back his friends one more time before he opens up to them. I wish there was one scene that kind of explored that with Rocket and Quill in that moment, or I guess even one more scene at the end of the movie with Rocket's fighting back from his team breaking up, because Rocket's been asleep essentially throughout this entire movie. He's been knocked out, so from one moment he's having fun, on nowhere with his Guardians. They're all a team together, and the next moment he's knocked out, and when he wakes up he's fighting the High Evolutionary, and all of a sudden the team is breaking up. I would like to have a little more conversation there when it came to breaking up, to see how sad Rocket is to see his family go off once again, but to kind of be happy that he has a new family that he can kind of go on to, and he has a new life ahead of him. Maybe just those two more moments added to Rocket's story would have made it absolutely perfect, but honestly, he was so great in this movie. He's absolutely the beating heart of the entire trilogy of Guardians of the Galaxy, and he's just easily one of my favorite characters. And Rocket's send-off in this film is, of course, going to be Quill, essentially granting him the title of the leader, the captain of the Guardians of the Galaxy, which I think is very much earned. He has been a very integral and very important part of the Guardians from the very beginning, and if they do make another Guardians film with a different filmmaker in mind, I'm glad that they have Rocket Raccoon as the leader, because I love this character. I'm excited to see what his journey would be as a character, as kind of a new person. He's no longer kind of held back by the trauma of his past, so I'm curious to see where they go with this character in the future as well. Of course, Groot is also going to be a part of this new Guardians of the Galaxy team, which also had a lot of great and funny moments in this movie. Some great like kaiju Groot moments, some King Groot moments in the post-credit scene. So of course, Groot being a very fun part of this movie, and of course him actually talking in this movie, not just saying I'm Groot, but by saying I love you guys by the ending of this film, which I don't know if it's like maybe it's a type of thing where us as an audience, we've heard Groot say I'm Groot so many times that maybe we understand him now. Maybe he is still saying I'm Groot. We're actually hearing what he's actually saying now. We are understanding his language. So I'm going to take it as that, because if Groot can just speak English normally now, sure. But also on the Guardians team is going to be Kraglin, is going to be Cosmo, and this little girl that they also rescued that have her own powers. So who knows who this character is? I'm not, of course, a comic reader, but if you do know, definitely let me know in the comments down below. And if there's going to be one weak leak in terms of the cast or in terms of the characters in this film, I guess it's going to be Adam Warlock. You know, I did enjoy him when he was on screen. His power set was cool, and I think that his action sequences prove that James Gunn will do a great Superman movie. But this character didn't really have a lot to do because he was kind of an offspring of this second movie where you kind of felt like you had to have him in this film. But I think his role in this film was serviceable enough, and his arc of, you know, being a more naive character like Vision at the end of Age of Ultron to becoming this character that realizes that he has some value after the death of his mother, seeing the Guardians have some empathy, which I think this movie is extremely empathetic, you know, despite its very, you know, darker themes in this movie. It is a very empathetic movie, and to see the empathy of the Guardians of the Galaxy rub off on Adam Warlock was a very nice little character arc for him as well. But this, of course, is not just a send-off to the Guardians of the Galaxy, it's also a send-off to James Gunn in the MCU, especially with these characters. And this is what I'm most sad about this movie, because yes, nobody did die in this movie, which, you know, I did get very emotional when it came to the death of all of Rocket's, you know, childhood friends in this movie, which is absolutely tragic. That's, of course, going to be the moment that I think most people will cry in this movie. Of course, the fake out Star-Lord death really almost got me. That one was choking me up definitely when that was happening, but of course that didn't end up paying off. But as soon as the credits hit, and as soon as the Guardians were all telling each other that they're saying goodbye, they all go their separate ways, and you get to see, directed by James Gunn, and you know that James Gunn is also going to be separating from these actors and from these characters. That is actually the saddest part of this movie for me, because I love these characters. I love the arcs and the journeys that everybody's been on throughout the entirety of the MCU, and I'm finally going to join the Fire James Gunn hashtag from Warner Brothers, because I don't want to see DC fail. I just want to see him keep making Guardians of the Galaxy films. I want so many more of these things, but we're not going to get any more with this team, which is absolutely tragic. It makes me hesitant for these characters in the future, but also excited for the future of DC. So James Gunn, bravo to you. You did a great job directing the action sequences. There was that hallway fight sequence with the High Evolutionary and all those animal creatures. There's a lot of great moments in this film with the directing and the action and the writing and the tone and the editing, literally everything. The sound design was also great in this movie. There's a lot of great sound design moments, especially when they're fighting the High Evolutionary at the very end. There's one like music cue that was just really good. Of course, the music choices that he has. He's a phenomenal director, and I think that DC has gotten a great grab. They have a great personnel leading the charge over at DC now. But that is going to be my review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. I know it's a bit of a long one. I definitely did not talk about everything that I wanted to talk about. The little, I guess, what was it called? It's like the fake Earth planet that they were on with all the animal creatures. That was a fun sequence as well. I didn't really get to dive too much into that, but I did enjoy that, how the Guardians of the Galaxy team kind of split up, and Gamora got to see how the team kind of functions, how they're kind of a dysfunctional family that works really well together, kind of accidentally. It was really great as well. And of course, all the different cameos they got to see of all James Gunn's family members, and just all these other things in this film that I didn't get a chance to talk about. Definitely comment down below. Let me know all the moments that you enjoyed that I didn't talk about in this review itself. And what do you guys think of the send-off for these Guardians characters? I'm very curious to hear all you guys' thoughts. Did you love this movie as much as I did? I don't think it's as good as the first Guardians of the Galaxy for me, because I think that movie is just kind of a tighter, more, I guess, it flowed a little bit better in terms of a story, in terms of how natural that story just flows and moves. This movie had very well pacing. It just felt not as naturally smooth because of that kind of, you know, tonal whiplash at times, but really it's right up neck and neck for me with the original Guardians of the Galaxy, which is one of my favorite films in the MCU. So I do think that this is easily a top 10 MCU movie for me. What do you guys think? What are your rankings down below? I'm very curious to hear all of your thoughts. And so if you enjoyed this review, make sure you guys check out my Evil Dead Rise review, which I absolutely love that movie as well. It's a great film. It's been a great year for movies. And also I did watch Beau is Afraid. I didn't get a chance to review it, but follow my Letterboxd. That movie is something else. So like I said, thanks guys for watching this video. Subscribe, leave a like, comment down below all your thoughts on this movie, and I hope to see you all in my next one.